Hi everyone. Today we're going to look a little bit at the blended method using information gleaned from the book Blended, Using Disruptive Innovation to Improve Schools by Michael Horn and Heather Staker. This narration will look a little bit at what blended is, why we might use it, how we might use it, and what it might look like in our classrooms for us and for our students. If you are intrigued by what you see, I recommend getting the book and looking further into it. Let's get started. So first, let's look at our why. Always start with our why, right? So why do we do what we do? To provide a quality and challenging course for our students that centers on them and their learning. How can we meet our why? With an online format that still allows for building connections, community, and supporting each and every student towards success. A blended approach can help us achieve this. But let's look at what a blended approach is. And before we look at what it is, let's look at what it is not. And please forgive the following Star Trek theme that will be prevalent throughout. But anyway, let's get started. A blended approach is not just using technology in the classroom. It's not a completely asynchronous, tech-rich instructional course without any peer-to-peer or teacher-peer interaction. So it's not just an online course, and it's not just, well, I'll do some asynchronous time here and some synchronous time here. And if anyone's a Star Trek fan, you might recognize that quote. But what is a blended approach? It is a carefully crafted textile weaving together meaningful online instruction for the purpose of delivering content and some practice with in-person collaborative opportunities in order to dive more deeply into the mastery of that content. In short, it's a method for providing personalized competency-based learning. And yes, it involves an element or two of student choice in a course that is designed and curated by the teacher, who remains a mentor and guide, helping each student achieve their own learning outcomes and those learning outcomes established by the teacher. So there is going to be a blend of asynchronous and synchronous options. So options for learning and instructions. What should students do asynchronously on their own, not with their peers, not during class time, and what should they do with their peers or with the teacher? So asynchronous time is a great time for student agency, in which they can choose the modality, or you can let them know which modality they have choice. And this can be their time, place, path, or pace. And we'll talk about that later. But mainly learning content. What should the student know? This is when they're going to be looking at that content and learning it as individually and independently as they can. Ways for students to feel and be successful, focusing on their accomplishments, where their growth, what can they do? Looking at this individualized mastery. So a lot of self-reflection is going to go towards that. And their assessments, formative and summative, will be on key concepts that they know and clear that are going towards their learning outcome goals. And some of you might take that modality for PACE, where they can even take those assessments when they feel ready to do it, or providing opportunities for them to re-demonstrate mastery. Synchronous. So when the students are together, when will we be with the students? When will they be with each other? This is the teacher agency. The teacher has the control over when and how synchronous, deeper learning takes place. So mainly that information that they learned on their own, independently, this is when we apply and demonstrate that knowledge. So we're going to think about how can the student apply and demonstrate that knowledge with group discussions, class conversations, hands-on projects, project-based learning, performance aspects, etc. This is when we get to make time for the students to have fun with each other and with friends, building that community. This is also a time for peer-to-peer or teacher-student, feedback opportunities and mentoring opportunities. This is where the students can work with each other to connect the content they're learning online with real life. That relevancy can give that content extra meaning. You, as the teacher, get to choose what your course is going to look like and how much will be asynchronous and how much will be synchronous. What is a blended approach? Or, better question, why do we call it blended? Well, it's a mix of a few things, and let's get started with some of them that Dave Ferrace has already told us in an email. And many of these things, many of us already do, but we can do them even better with a blended approach. So a blended approach incorporates backwards design, where we always have the outcome goal in mind. And in this aspect, we also make it very clear for the student and always public so they also know what the outcome learning goal is. It is active learning. There's active learning with students so that they can engage with the material they're learning in order to apply that knowledge and demonstrate mastery of that content. And then there's meaningful assessment, how they're going to apply that knowledge with performative, project-based, competency-based assessments. And there's more. But how do I make my course blended? Well, first, we're going to have 4 components. First component is that backwards design. We're going to take that learning goal and competencies that we plan to assess, and we're going to make them clear and public, not only for our students to know where their outcome goal is in mind, what the finish line is, but so we have a constant reminder as well that every assignment and every assessment is working towards that goal and assessing that goal. So some questions to keep in mind. What learning goal are you trying to accomplish? What do you need to do to accomplish said learning goal? And how will you know when you've met said learning goal? You'll notice these questions are more for your students than for yourself. And it's always good for the students to know what that learning outcome goal is. The second component is student agency. Which modality do you want students to control? There are 4 options, and you can have in a blended, the students must be able to control at least one of these modalities. So the modalities are time, place, path, or pace. And then what part of their learning will students reflect on to take control of their own learning? So reflection is another part where students can reflect on their process, reflect on their progress, and make action steps towards further growth. The third component is teacher design. The teacher gets to choose when and what learning takes place directly with teacher and or peers. So in order to do this, the teacher must provide structure for students as a path to success. Turns out our LMS Canvas is a great way to provide that structure and give students a clear path to success with modules. Remember, always make learning public the learning goal outcomes. And finally, the fourth component is creating the culture of the class. You're new to a blended approach, so are your students. Set the norms early. Set the expectations high. High expectations with clear teacher support and clear learning outcome goals paired with flexibility and sympathy puts your students on a path to achieving those goals and leads to their own ownership of their own learning. And I'm sorry this meme got cut out. We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity. So what does a blended class look like? There are 4 official models of blended learning. For our purposes, we're going to focus on the rotation and the flex models. The rotation is more synchronous and also known as a sustaining model. So more teacher control, less student agency. The flex model is more asynchronous. It's the disruptive model. More student agency, less teacher control. The rotational model is lots more face-to-face with some online supplements. But remember, when they're online, the students get to choose one of those modalities still. And they have control over that. The flex model is more online learning with some face-to-face support in order to enrich and deepen that learning. Let's look a little bit at the rotation model because many of us probably already use aspects from this. So there's station rotation and flipped classroom are 2 of the main components of a rotational model. The station rotation model is where students have different stations that they will rotate through. They travel through these predetermined stations that the teacher has preordained. Here's an example. Students work in small groups with direct instruction with the teacher. Then they move towards individual asynchronous practice with each other. And then they work together, maybe in a breakout room, to model that work or work together towards things. The other one is a flipped classroom. This is where what often would take place in a classroom, the delivering of content, whether it be in lectures or other forms or videos, will take place as homework, would take place individually with the student so they can control the pace that they want in order to get that information. And then class time is used for what was traditionally homework, the application and practice of that knowledge. How will you know which method to use? Well, depends on you, depends on your class. Which method would work best for your learning outcome goals? Which method would you as the teacher be comfortable trying and using? And which method do you think would motivate your students to learn in order to, wait for it, find joy in learning? The best part is you can actually combine elements of both. You don't have to choose one. So it's not always everything by the book, everything by the book. Sometimes the book is really more what you call guidelines than actual rules. But really, how will you know if it's working? Well, did your students meet the clearly stated learning outcome goals? That's the main thing. Feedback is absolutely necessary. Feedback and reflection. Student self-reflection, where they focus on areas for growth and growth. So always focusing on the positive. Peer-to-peer reflection and feedback, where students can give and get constructive positive feedback from each other. Teacher to student, in-person, FaceTime feedback. And then always remember, it's good for us to get feedback too. So asking the students to give us feedback also on the course and what they need, and are we giving them the support that they need to succeed? So will a blended approach diminish my role as a teacher? This is a common question. It seems that a lot of blended approach is a lot of students doing the work independently and not in the way that we're used to. Well, no, it won't. It really won't. The teacher presence is still very, very vital, and you can do that with virtually. You can do that with technology, with videos, with memes, with your own picture everywhere, and then building that connection in face-to-face time. Why should you try a blended approach? 2 main reasons. Necessity. We're online, most likely, baby. So let's make that online experience even better. And then it's extremely student-centered. It lets the students take control of their own learning. How is it student-centered? They get to choose their modality. And finally, they demonstrate their mastery because it's a competency-based course where they're working towards that clearly stated outcome goal. Children are a lot stronger than you think. Good luck with your blended approach.